Germany has backed down on an initial refusal to send weapons to support Ukraine as it battles the Russian invasion. Berlin has now agreed to a major armaments delivery, including anti-tank weapons, surface-to-air missiles and rocket-propelled grenades. The policy shift brings Germany into line with other Western allies supplying weapons to Ukraine. Earlier, Chancellor Olaf Scholz met leaders from Poland and Lithuania to discuss imposing tougher sanctions against Russia on top of measures already announced by the European Union and the United States. Bolstering the NATO military presence in several EU countries is also on the table. Well, with me in the studio is political correspondent Thomas Sparrow. Thomas, welcome. The shift from Germany here to the delivery of lethal weapons, how significant is this?
This has to be one of the most significant shifts in German foreign policy in years. What has happened not only now, but this week in Germany. You may remember that at the beginning of the week, the shift there was that Germany had decided to halt or to freeze the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which links Russia to Germany. That was already then a major change. And now you have this. Also a very significant change because Germany had had a long-standing policy of not sending weapons to crisis zones because of its own belligerent history, because it believed that it could make diplomacy more difficult. There were other reasons as well, but the fact that now the German government has confirmed that it is indeed sending weapons to Ukraine, both directly from its own Bundeswehr stocks, but also indirectly through countries like the Netherlands or Estonia, is really a remarkable shift in foreign policy in Germany.
And quite a few things shifting as we speak. Germany is also joining other EU countries in supporting targeted restrictions on Russia's use of the SWIFT financial system. What's changed in Germany's position?
And the key word is targeted, because for now Germany had also been very reluctant to support other EU countries in banning Russia from the SWIFT financial system, because it believed that by doing so there would be major collateral damage here in Germany for businesses that work with Russia or for gas deliveries that come from Russia to Germany. But now the change is that they want to work in a way that they can have this targeted way of sanctioning Russia in this regard, which that basically means is that they'll try and find ways in which those collateral damages are reduced to a minimum, while at the same time making sure that the ban is implemented so that Russia can be affected.
We're also hearing that the first groups of people fleeing the war in Ukraine have arrived through Poland and to here in Germany. Do we know yet how many people are taking that journey?
This is actually another element of this whole conflict. So it's not only about sending weapons to Ukraine or imposing more sanctions on Russia. It's also about making sure that people who are fleeing the conflict in Ukraine can be received not only here in Germany, but also in other countries. If you look at EU and UN estimates, the numbers of people who might flee if the conflict continues, if the conflict worsens, is a very, very high number indeed. So far here in Germany, those numbers are more limited. So the border region between Germany and Poland, the federal state of Brandenburg, has said that it is expecting up to 10,000 people. Here in Berlin, the first few families have also been registered. Numbers are still very low, but those numbers could increase certainly if the conflict worsens. That's why preparations are also underway, not only here in Germany, but also in countries like Poland, to make sure that people who flee the conflict in Ukraine can also be accepted and taken in a humane way.
Our political correspondent Thomas Sparrow, thanks for joining us. Well, we're joined now by Daria Romanenko. She's an aid worker in eastern Ukraine. Daria, tell us where you are at the moment and do you feel safe?
Good evening. Well, yes, I'm in Dnipro right now. It's a big city in eastern part of Ukraine, but the road here was, pretty tough. We left Slovyansk today, first aiming to go to Kharkiv, where our driver came from just maybe a couple of hours ago, and then we couldn't go back because the street was blocked, like the main street connecting Slovyansk and Kharkiv was blocked by Russian tanks, so we had to make a U-turn. After that, we were driving a lot through Donetsk Oblast, entering Dnipro region, and then there were so many checkpoints and military vehicles, And we were standing in traffic jam for more than 3 hours when we were reaching Dnipro. So yeah, it was a tough travel.
Daria, Russia says it's only targeting military infrastructure. You're on the ground. Do you see that as the case? Is that what you're seeing?
This is not the case. This is a lie. Russia is targeting hospitals, kindergartens. It's targeting just normal places and areas where people live, but it's nothing new. I've been working in Donbas for some time where, for example, shellings of kindergartens and schools started already weeks ago and in general 8 years ago. And those reports from Kiev that there are apartment buildings shelled, they're definitely truth.
Danya, Volodymyr Zelensky was a comedian, then a businessman, and now he's the president. Do you feel now he is the leader that you need? Are people behind him? Do they see him as the right leader for this situation?
Well, let's see. He didn't flee the country. He stayed with his people. What it seems to me, he's doing his best. I personally didn't vote for him. I just didn't vote in Ukraine in general. But to me, it seems like he's definitely a great leader, and it's a very good time that it's really great for Ukrainian people that he's the president right now, and not, for example, Russian marionette Yanukovych, who just left the country as soon as it became tough.
So when Zelensky is calling people into the streets to essentially defend their country, do you think they're going to follow? Are there enough people to stay and fight to give you a chance to win?
Well, definitely what I saw when we were driving today is that there are so many people, there are so many men who are kind of like local people living in small villages and towns, and they kind of dress up into some military clothes, and they're joining this forces of the territorial forces of Ukraine, which is not the Ukrainian official military. So it's just made up of some volunteers who want to defend their district, their town, their city, and their country. There's definitely a huge wave of patriotism going on right now. It's just people who want to defend their homes and their country from the invaders.
Daria Romanenko, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, people in Kyiv are facing a choice of whether to flee or to stay. Those who cannot leave must scramble to find shelter when Russian attacks begin. And deep below the city, there's a ready-built system of tunnels, the metro.
With another night of air raids ahead, the people of Kyiv head to the metro. Kyiv's underground public transport system is now a network of bomb shelters. For days now, people have come here to seek refuge from Russian rockets and bombs.
I was waiting for a bus to evacuate me. Our company had organized our evacuation and rented a bus to pick us up. But now the bus can't enter the capital. I stayed at another station first and now have moved here.
To serve as bomb shelters is exactly what the underground system was designed for. It was built after World War II, when the Soviet Union feared a nuclear war. The deepest station is more than 100 meters under the surface.
It's very safe here, I think. I don't know whether it really is, but at least it feels safe here.
After the Russian attacks began, many people fled the city, but some are refusing to leave. Kyiv is being protected. I come down here to wait until it's safe to go out. I have no other plans. I trust our army, and I trust that it will end well. I have no desire to leave Kyiv or Ukraine. It's a particular irony that the first time the shelters are being used is under an attack ordered from Moscow, the former Soviet capital that once ordered this underground network to be built. when Russia and Ukraine...
Well, for more, I'm joined by Igor Kosov. He's an investigative journalist from Ukraine. For security reasons, we won't reveal the exact location. Igor, 3 days into this invasion, tell me about your experience so far.
I haven't seen any direct fighting myself, but many explosions. There was some gunfire not far from my building last night. Locals think that special operations forces were involved. Everyone who has family, or, well, not everyone, but many people who have families have fled the city and moved west. Some have stayed behind. Many have joined territorial defense units. Everyone's calm and determined, if nervous. And people are just bracing for the worst and hoping for the best.
You talk about hearing the sounds of the Russian military. They're bigger and better equipped. Do you believe Kyiv can withstand this Russian attack?
Yes, I think I can. The past few days have shown that the Russians have not been as effective as many experts could have predicted. They've made blunders. Ukraine has managed to inflict surprisingly heavy losses on them, and obviously the Ukrainians have much higher morale because they're fighting for their very existence, whereas the Russians seem to be mostly very young people who were born after Putin came into power, and many of them, the POWs captured by Ukraine, are saying that they were just told they were heading towards exercises when they were ordered to invade, and then they found themselves just thrown into an invasion.
Ukraine's president...
I do think Kyiv has a... Yes.
Sorry, Igor. Ukraine's president is urging civilians to battle Russian troops with self-made Molotov cocktails. What are you planning to do?
I'm planning to stay and report and do my job. I want to make sure the world sees all of this and what happens here, and that's my focus. I am not planning to get into combat unless I or my friends or colleagues are directly threatened. I think my role is to report the news and show the truth.
Do you think the people who are choosing to stay and fight, Igor, are they the few or are there many? How many people are prepared to stay and take up arms against the Russian army?
I've heard various estimates that tens of thousands have joined territorial defense units. I can't confirm that right now, but I've heard it's quite a lot of people. The people are joining in droves. There was a poll that showed that about half of Ukraine would stay and fight or support the military in some way.
Igor Kosov, I wish you luck and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeated a call to Ukrainian soldiers to surrender, also making baseless allegations against the Ukrainian government.
Once again, I appeal to the servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine. Do not allow neo-Nazis to use your children, your wives and elderly as human shields. Take power into your own hands. It seems that it would be easier for us to come to an agreement than with this gang of drug addicts and neo-Nazis who settled in Kyiv and took the entire Ukrainian people hostage.
I'm joined now by Pavel Felgenhauer. He's an analyst specialising in the Russian military and based in Moscow. Welcome back to DW, Pavel. Putin's calculation seems to have been that his forces would secure a swift and clear victory. From what you see, is this going to plan?
Well, it's well known and often repeated in the American military, especially that the best, finest military plans go to rubbish as soon as you meet the enemy in the field, because the enemy has his own plans. So that's exactly what's happening. Will this be decisive right now? It's not too early a bit to say. The Russian offensive seems to be a bit off schedule. Though the Russians still have the initiative, that's for sure, and the Ukrainians are just pushing back, resisting, but the Russians have the initiative and can use it. What's especially troubling is that the Ukrainian military and political structures are somehow still holding, and that Ukrainian resistance is still organized. Actually, the Pentagon generals believed that in 72 hours, 3 days, the Ukrainian organized resistance would collapse, and then it would be maybe guerrilla warfare. So they were providing actually weapons before the war broke out. Weapons that can be used by guerrillas, shoulder-launched Stingers and javelins and other such anti-tank weapons. But the Ukrainian military, their staffs are still working. It's an organized resistance, and that's not good. That's not good at all for the Russian strategic plans to take over Ukraine and rewrite their constitution, rewrite everything, because if there's continued and maybe even successful organized resistance, that will raise the morale of the Ukrainian soldiers and population, and it will be harder for Russia to operate. And actually, if it drags on, it could be a war of attrition that Russia can actually, in the end, lose.
Pavel, they're incredible words to hear that Russia may lose this war. If they're coming up with a change of plan now, which is being spoken of, that they're going to now broaden the offensive in Ukraine, what does that mean for the situation on the ground?
Well, I think they began with a kind of hybrid warfare that everyone was expecting. I mean, special forces, light forces, paratroopers penetrating in, not the really classical things that the Russian military are good of, not the way they were, say, fighting in Syria, where they liberated Syrian cities by turning them into piles of rubble. So if they, now most likely they'll take their thing more seriously, more Russian style, and be more aggressive in using heavy weaponry. And that's not good, of course, to break the morale of the Ukrainians, apparently, and still win this conflict. Russia, the leadership is not ready to compromise and withdraw. Though, of course, they hoped it would be swift, especially that a swift victory would mean that the Western sanctions machine would most likely lose its pace if it's all over. But if it's not all over, and if there's continued resistance and organized resistance, the West also will change. Instead of just punishing Russia, they'll begin sending real weapons. I mean, tanks, heavy guns, maybe even jet fighters, helicopters, attack helicopters. I mean, what you send not to a guerrilla force, but to a fighting state.
Pavel Felgenauer, a Russian military analyst based in Moscow. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
To some breaking news coming in now. And the German government says it will supply 1,000 anti-tank weapons and 500 Stinger surface-to-air missiles directly to the Ukraine. It's a significant policy shift. Chancellor Olaf Scholz earlier also agreed to allow the delivery of other weapons held by the Netherlands and Estonia. More on that as it comes in. All right, now many of the people caught up in the invasion have fled to neighbouring countries. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees have fled since Thursday. Not surprisingly, most are heading to countries neighbouring Ukraine. They include EU members Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, as well as non-EU member Moldova. As fighting worsens, these countries are now bracing for more refugees in the coming days.
The train station in the Polish city of Przemysl, 10 kilometres from Ukraine. For many Ukrainian refugees, it's their first stop after crossing the border. These 4 children are having their first hot meal in 30 hours after travelling 450 kilometres through Ukraine. Their fathers weren't able to join them. They stayed behind to fight. The children are now waiting for their mothers to arrive.
There were masses of people on the way. We took a bus towards the border and then walked. Then we stood in a long queue. Suddenly we saw our cousins, and we've been together since then. We waited a long time for the transport from the border. And now, we're finally here.
The way was hard and long. Because of traffic jams, they had to get off the bus and walk the last 15 kilometres to the border. Near Lviv, they heard explosions.
It was terrible. There were rockets flying. We came here without passports. We only have our birth certificates. We were let into Poland as refugees.
The Polish authorities have decided to let all Ukrainians into the country, even those who have no passports, which are normally required to enter the EU. At the train station, as well as in several reception centres, they are supported by volunteers and the military. The refugees are relieved to have escaped the war, but they're also worried about what they have left behind, the events in their country. Those who are not picked up here by friends or relatives are taken in by private individuals. The willingness to help is great. Within a day of the Russian invasion, 30,000 refugees arrived in Poland from Ukraine. The government in Warsaw expects that up to 1 million people could flee to the country, and it promises that they will all be taken in.
Well, Joanna Gedeni Williams is the head of communications for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva, Switzerland. Welcome. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees have already arrived in Poland. Do we know how many more people are expected to leave Ukraine?
Well, as you can imagine, the situation is extremely fluid. As of yesterday, we had accounted for 50,000 refugees who had fled Ukraine. By this afternoon, it was 150,000, and the number continues to grow. I fear that there will be many, many more who are either on the move or will be on the move when security allows them to move more freely from Ukraine.
If it does come to the worst, you're talking about tens of thousands already. We're expecting many, many more, as you say. What are other countries doing to prepare for that eventuality?
Well, we are planning within UNHCR for up to 4 million people that would become refugees in the neighboring countries. This is, of course, the contingency planning. We have no idea if the number will be smaller or larger at this point. But right now, we're very grateful that all of the countries neighboring Ukraine have kept their borders open. And more than that, they have really provided all of the necessary food, water, medical attention, as well as basic needs. And it's not just the governments, it's also the local communities. They've really gone out of their way to even open up their own homes to families, really providing them, creating food banks, coming together to really show that they are welcome and that they are showing solidarity to the Ukrainians.
Just quickly, Europe has never been particularly unified over the topic of refugees. Are you witnessing a unifying effect in response to this aggression?
Right now, what we're seeing is unconditional support and welcome and solidarity. Certainly, we hope that that will continue, that the borders will remain open, and that obviously that we'll be able to mobilize even greater support in the coming days and weeks. It's very clear that agencies like UNHCR will need to reinforce our existing staff capacity and supplies on the ground.
Joanna Gedeni Williams, Head of Communications for the UNHCR. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
News from the world of sport is that Poland will not play their World Cup playoff with Russia in Moscow next month, according to the Polish Football Federation. Poland and Bayern Munich star Robert Lewandowski tweeted his support for the move, saying he could not imagine playing against Russia at this time. Sweden and Czech Republic have taken the same stance, while football's world governing body FIFA has yet to rule out playing in Russia.